impossible to do so, even in my diary. I considered writing about it to be a forbidden act that would call for punishment. Not being able to write anything else afterward, for instance. I felt quite relieved just now when I saw that I could go on writing, that nothing terrible had happened. In fact, now that I have finally committed it to paper, I feel that it is an ordinary incident, far more common among families than I had originally thought. It may be that narrative, any kind of narrative, lends normality to people's deeds, including the most dramatic ones. But because this scene has remained frozen inside me, an image empty of speech, except for the sentence I told my lovers, the words which I have used to describe it seem strange, almost incongruous. It has become a scene destined for other people. Before starting, I reckoned I would be able to recall every single detail. It turns out I can remember only the general atmosphere, our respective places in the kitchen, and a few words or expressions. I've forgotten how the argument actually started, what we had to eat, and whether my mother was still wearing her white storekeeper's coat, or whether she had taken it off in view of the bicycle ride. I have no particular memory of that Sunday morning besides the usual routine, attending Mass, buying the cakes, and so on, although I have often had to think back to the time before it happened, as I would do later on for other events in my life. Yet I am sure I was wearing my blue dress, the one with white spots, because during the 2 summers that followed, every time I put it on, I would think, it's the dress I wore that day. Of the weather, too, I am quite sure, a combination of sun, clouds, and wind. From then on, that Sunday was like a veil that came between me and everything I did. I would play, I would read, I would behave normally, but somehow I wasn't there. Everything had become artificial. I had trouble learning my lessons, when before I only needed to read them once to know them by heart. Acutely aware of everything around me, and yet unable to concentrate, I lost my insouciance and natural ability to learn. What had happened was not something that could be judged. My father, who loved me, had tried to kill my mother, who also loved me. Because my mother was more religious than my father, and because she did the accounts and spoke to my school mistresses, I suppose I thought it normal for her to shout at him the same way she shouted at me. It was no one's fault, no one was to blame. I just had to stop my father from killing my mother and going to jail. I believe that for months, maybe even years, I waited for the scene to be repeated. I was positive it would happen again. I found the presence of customers comforting, dreading the moments when my parents and I were alone, in the evening and on Sunday afternoons. I was on the alert as soon as they raised their voices. I would scrutinize my father, his expression, his hands. In every sudden silence, I would read the omens of disaster. Every day at school, I wondered whether, on returning home, I would be faced with the aftermath of a tragedy. When they did show signs of affection for each other, joking, sharing a laugh or a smile, I imagined I had gone back to the time before that day. It was just a bad dream. 1 hour later, I realized that these signs only meant something at the time. They offered no guarantee for the future. Around that time, a strange song was often heard on the radio, mimicking a fight that suddenly breaks out in a saloon. There was a pause, a voice whispered, "You could have heard a pin drop," followed by a cacophony of shouts and jumbled sentences. Every time I heard it, I was seized with panic. One day, my uncle handed me the detective story he was reading. What would you do if your father was accused of murder but wasn't guilty? The question sent a chill down my spine. I kept seeing the images of a tragedy which had never occurred. The scene never did happen again. My father died 15 years later, also on a Sunday in June. It is only now that a thought occurs to me. My parents may have discussed both that Sunday afternoon and my father's murderous gesture. They may have arrived at an explanation or even an excuse.